A man can spend 30 years learning how weight works, how to read a load path, how to calculate what a structure can bear before the math stops being theoretical and starts being catastrophic. I was good at that math. Spent the better part of my career standing on half-finished overpasses in the cold, looking at numbers, adjusting, compensating, redistributing load across members that were being asked to carry more than they were designed for. You learn, after long enough, that the failures that matter are never the dramatic ones, not the visible cracks, not the obvious fractures, not the things that announce themselves. The ones that matter are the ones you didn't see forming, the slow separations, the joints that look solid from the outside while something essential was pulling apart underneath, quietly, over years, with no sound at all until the day there was nothing left to pull. I spent 31 years reading structures that way. Turns out I was less good at reading the one I lived inside. My name is Harold Greer. I am 67 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of Columbus, Ohio, which is not where I expected to be at 67, but which is, as it turns out, exactly where I need to be. I worked for the Ohio Department of Transportation for 31 years as a structural bridge engineer, retired 4 years ago with a reasonable pension, a right shoulder that has opinions about cold weather, and a 1998 Ford F-150 that I have absolutely no intention of replacing. The truck has 214,000 miles on it. It runs fine. I know it sounds the way I know my own breathing, every rattle, every hesitation, what each one means and what it doesn't. That truck and I understand each other. I coach youth baseball on Saturday mornings when the weather allows. I make my own coffee at 6:15 every morning, and I take it to the back porch while it's still dark and I watch the city come on. That is my morning. It has been my morning for 4 years now, and I want you to understand that I say that without complaint, without self-pity, without any of the things people expect a man in his late 60s to feel when his life looks different than he planned. That quiet porch and that cold coffee and that waking city are mine in a way that nothing in the last 11 years of my life quite was. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Let me back up to a Tuesday in September. My son Marcus called me at 7:47 in the morning, which told me something before he said a word. Marcus Greer, 38 years old, works in logistics, lives in Gahanna with his wife Priya and their son Oliver, who had just turned 5 in August. Marcus was not a morning caller. He called in the evenings after Oliver was down, when he had 20 minutes to be a person instead of a father. A morning call meant either very good news or something he'd been carrying long enough that it couldn't wait until evening. It was the second kind. "Hey, Dad." The pause that followed had a specific shape. He'd already said what he was about to say 15 times in his head. I could hear the weight of all 15 tries in the silence before the first word. "Ollie's been asking for you." I set my fork down. "What do you mean?" "He wants to know when Grandpa's coming back for Sunday dinner." Marcus cleared his throat. "He thinks you and Mom had a fight. He thinks that's why you haven't been there." I have not been to Sunday dinner at Marcus's house in 6 weeks. Not since the Sunday in August when I left the table early and drove home alone in the rain and sat in my truck in the driveway for 40 minutes before going inside. Marcus didn't know everything that had happened that evening. He knew I'd left early. He didn't know why. He hadn't pushed, because Marcus has always had the good judgment to know when to give a man room. 6 weeks of Oliver asking where Grandpa was. Every night, 5 years old, asking every single night before he went to sleep, with the consistency that only very small children and very deep wounds have. I want you to understand something about that. 5-year-olds do not have strategies. They don't calculate what's safe to say and what isn't. They don't soften questions or dress them up in politeness. When Oliver asked where I was, he was not making a statement about my marriage. He was not trying to make anyone uncomfortable. He was simply a child who loved his grandfather and had noticed, the way children notice everything that matters, that his grandfather was gone. That is the whole of it. Nothing more complicated than that. And somewhere in that house in Gahanna, at the dinner table where that boy asked his question every evening, was a woman who had heard every single one of those questions and said nothing to me about it. Not once. Dad. Marcus's voice was careful, measured the way he got when he was working up to something. Is everything okay with you and Mom? Give me a little time on that one, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Ollie really loves you, Dad. He talks about you. I know, son. I know he does. I got off the phone. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold, and I thought about 11 years. 11 years of the specific kind of loneliness that can exist inside a marriage when you've been, for so long, doing all the work of two people. The kind where you are not technically alone, and yet find yourself repeatedly standing in the doorway of a room containing your wife, trying to start a conversation that keeps ending before it begins. My wife's name is Sandra Greer. We married 11 years ago. Second marriage for both of us. Marcus was grown by then, out of the house and on his own, and I had been alone long enough to mistake efficiency for compatibility. Sandra had built a medical billing company from nothing over 20 years, which I admired genuinely and for a long time. She was organized in a way that very capable people sometimes are, which is to say completely, right down to her emotions, which had a place in a schedule and were not available for unplanned use. I found that quality attractive at 56. I had been through enough disorder to mistake control for calm. What I didn't see clearly enough for long enough was the difference between a woman who was calm and a woman who had simply decided that other people's needs were a category of problem rather than a category of life. She was never unkind. I want to be precise about that. Sandra was not a cruel woman. She didn't say cutting things or manufacture conflict. She just had a specific radius of concern, and anyone outside it, no matter who they were or what they needed, waited. I had spent 11 years adjusting for that, compensating, redistributing the load onto myself the way you redistribute load on a structure that isn't performing quietly, continuously, without making it obvious, because you have told yourself that is what you do when you love someone. The problem with that approach, the thing they teach you early on in structural work, is that compensation has limits. You can carry an imbalance for years. You can make the math work on paper. But somewhere under the surface, under all that careful management, the original failure is still there, still accumulating. Oliver had been asking for me every night for 6 weeks. But this story really starts on the Sunday in August when I left Marcus's dinner table early, because that was the evening I stopped being able to explain things away. August 11th, Marcus's house. Sunday dinner at 5:30. Oliver met me at the door the way he always did, which was by running full speed across the living room and grabbing my right leg with the specific grip of a child who had decided that greeting people should be a physical commitment. "Grandpa, you're here." Right where I said I'd be, I told him. He pulled me inside to show me a drawing he'd done at school. A bridge, naturally, because I had spent the better part of 5 years explaining what bridge engineers did, and he had concluded that bridges were among the finest things human beings had ever produced. This particular drawing had 4 towers, 2 suspension cables rendered in orange crayon, and what appeared to be a swimming pool directly beneath the center span. I told him it was structurally innovative. He accepted that entirely. Dinner was good. Priya had made lamb, the way she did for family occasions, because Priya understood that cooking for people was an act of love and treated it accordingly. Sandra had brought a store-bought pie, which she did consistently, because she considered baking an inefficient use of time when a bakery was available. That is not a complaint. It is a data point, and I am trying to give you the full picture. The problem started at the table, not with a fight, not with anything loud or obvious. Oliver had been talking about his drawing, about his upcoming school year, about a substitute teacher and a runaway hamster, the normal currency of a 5-year-old's interior life. At some point during the main course, he turned to Sandra and asked, with the complete unguarded sincerity of a child who had not yet learned to protect himself in the answer, "Grandma, do you want to come to my soccer game on Saturday?" Sandra looked at him. I watched her face. There was a half-second before the smile came, and in that half-second I saw the calculation. The smile arrived. "We'll see, sweetheart." She said it warmly, with the tone of a woman who genuinely meant to consider it. Oliver nodded and went back to his lamb, satisfied, because he was 5 years old, and he still believed that "we'll see" meant what it sounded like. I have known for years what we'll see means. We'll see means no. It has always meant no. Soccer games and school plays and birthday lunches that ran 20 minutes longer than estimated. We'll see. And then a reason, always a reason that was technically true, always something that lived just close enough to the surface to be defensible. Work ran late. Her back was acting up. She had a call she couldn't move. I had spent 11 years accepting those reasons because they were individual, because each one on its own was plausible, because I loved her and I did not want to add them up. That evening at the dinner table, I added them up. All of them. Oliver went back to his lamb. I watched his face, and I saw him absorb the we'll see the way children absorb disappointments they don't have language for yet, which is quietly and with a small internal adjustment. And then they just keep going, because what else is there to do? I excused myself after dessert, said I had an early morning. I kissed Oliver on the head, told him his bridge was an engineering milestone, shook Marcus's hand. Thanked Priya for the lamb. Sandra was finishing her tea. She said goodbye from her chair. I drove home in the rain, parked in the driveway of the house on Minerva Lake Road at 8:22 p.m., and sat there with the engine off and the rain coming down on the windshield and the radio going low. I sat there for 40 minutes. When I went inside, Sandra was in her study at her desk, working. She looked up when I came in. You're back early. Yes. Everything okay at Marcus's? Fine. She looked at me for a moment with the expression of a woman who has assessed the situation and found it to be below the threshold that requires action. Then she went back to her screen. I stood in the doorway of that study for a long time. Then I went to bed. I did not say what I was thinking. That was, as it turned out, the last time I would make that particular mistake. Those 6 weeks between August and September, I spent being honest with myself in a way I had avoided for years. Not in a dramatic way. Not with confrontations or long emotional conversations. Quietly, at my kitchen table in the evenings, with a legal pad and a pen, and the specific discomfort of a man who has finally decided to look directly at something he's been looking slightly away from for a decade. I kept a log, dates and observations, the way I used to keep field notes on a job site, not a list of grievances. I want to be clear about that distinction. An engineering log is not a complaint. It is a record. It exists so that when you finally have to make a decision, you are making it based on what is actually there and not on what you hoped was there. The soccer games over 5 years. Oliver's school played at the end of the previous spring, which Sandra had confirmed she was attending, and then sent a text from a restaurant parking lot 40 minutes into performance. Sorry, client dinner ran over. Give Ollie a hug for me. The Thanksgiving when she spent the afternoon on her laptop at the kitchen counter while Marcus and Priya cooked everything, and Oliver asked her 4 times if she wanted to play cards, and she said, "We'll see, sweetheart," each time with the same warm professional smile, and never once looked up from the screen. The morning my shoulder was bad enough that I couldn't lift my right arm, and I asked her to grab my jacket from the hook by the door on her way past, and she was already late for a call, and she said, "You should probably see something about that, Harold," and left. I have pages of "will sees," pages of "you should probably," pages of small, efficient refusals dressed up as reasonableness. And underneath all of it, running through every page like a load path, like the structural line that tells you where the force is actually going, was Oliver, a 5-year-old boy who had been asking his grandfather to show up in his small, particular way, over and over, and whose grandmother had been answering him with "we'll see" for years. I am not, by instinct, a man who keeps score. I am a man who fixes things. But there comes a point, in engineering and in life, where the question stops being "how do I fix this?" and starts being whether this was ever designed to hold in the first place. I reached that point on a Tuesday morning in September, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee and a legal pad, when Marcus called and told me my grandson had been asking for me every night for 6 weeks. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I called a man named Dennis Warwick after Marcus, and I got off the phone. Dennis retired the same year I did, long-span project manager. 34 years on the job. The kind of man who had been present at enough genuine disasters to have no patience left for anything that wasn't the truth. We had lunch every few weeks. He had been watching the situation develop, In the patient-observant way Dennis watched most things for about 3 years. When I told him what Marcus had said about Oliver's question, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Harold, yeah, you already know what you're doing." "I know." "Then stop waiting for it to hurt enough to move." That was Dennis. He did not waste words on cushioning. I called Robert Cass at 9:15 that same morning. Family law, Columbus, 26 years in practice. Office on 5th Street above a dry cleaner. The kind of space that looked like nothing and ran like a machine. I had consulted him once before, briefly, the previous year, just to understand the lay of the land. He had been precise and unsentimental, which were the two qualities I needed most. "What's changed?" he asked when I reached him. "My grandson has been asking for me every night for 6 weeks," I said. My wife's response when I told her was that it wasn't our problem. A pause on his end. "How long has the marriage been this way?" I said, "Honestly, I'm not sure it was ever another way." He was quiet for a moment. "Come in tomorrow," he said. 9 o'clock. "Bring 3 years of financial records, if you have them organized." "I have them organized," I said. He said he had expected that. I spent the rest of that afternoon putting together what Robert had asked for. Statements, asset summaries, the documentation I had kept on the house and the pension, and the premarital investments with their original dates. The records were clean. I had kept them that way from the beginning, not out of suspicion. Not because I had anticipated this, but because I was an engineer and engineers document. You keep records so that when something fails, you know exactly what you were working with. It was a habit that had saved me professionally more times than I could count. It was about to do the same thing in my personal life. Wednesday morning. October 1st, Robert Cass's office, 9:04 a.m. He was a compact man in his early 60s, close-cropped gray hair, deliberate hands. The kind of attorney who had stopped being surprised by anything decades ago and had traded that surprise for something more useful, which was clarity. He read through what I had brought him without speaking for 11 minutes. He had a yellow legal pad on the desk, and he wrote on it occasionally, small, precise notes, without looking up. When he finished, he set the documents aside and folded his hands. "You kept everything separate, as much as I could." "Yes." "The house on Minerva Lake Road?" "Mine before the marriage. I have the original deed and the mortgage payoff records. Both predate the marriage by 7 years." He wrote something. "Investment accounts? In my name alone. Premarital in origin documented." He nodded. "The pension?" "State employee. Accrued entirely during my working years, which ended before the marriage." He put down his pen. "Harold." He looked at me in the measured way of a man who is about to tell you something straightforward and wants you to actually hear it. "Ohio divides marital assets equitably, not equally. Equitably, meaning fairly, meaning the court looks at what each person brought in, what was built together during the marriage, the length of the marriage, and a dozen other factors. Based on what you've shown me and what you told me about how things were kept, your picture is relatively clean." He paused. 11 years is still 11 years. There will be things to work through. We'll need a financial analyst on the asset side. I have someone I trust. Her name is Marguerite Holloway. She's thorough. I'll take her number," I said. He slid the card across. "One more thing." Robert said. He leaned back slightly. "You mentioned your grandson." "Yes." "Oliver." His nightly question. "Sandra's response when you told her." He was precise about what he wanted. "Any documented pattern of behavior toward the child?" "Not in a legal sense," I said, "but a consistent pattern of absence and refusal over 5 years, with specific incidents I can account for by date." He considered that. "That kind of pattern has value in characterizing the nature of the marriage," he said, "not as a primary claim, as context, as a picture." "Understood." He stood and extended his hand. "I'll have my assistant schedule a follow-up for next week. In the meantime, don't make any abrupt moves. Don't announce anything. Don't change your financial behavior. Just go home and be Harold Greer." "I can do that," I said. He almost smiled. "I suspect you've been doing it for quite some time." I walked out onto 5th Street into the October air, which was cold and direct and honest in the way Columbus gets in fall. I drove to Dennis's afterward. He met me at the door with black coffee. We sat in his kitchen for an hour, and I told him what Robert had said, and Dennis listened the way he always listened, which was completely, without offering anything until he was sure I was done. Then he said, "You doing okay?" "Getting there," I said. He nodded once. "That'll do." I had not yet told Sandra I had seen Robert Cass. I want to be precise about that, because I do not want you to misread my reasons. I was not constructing a trap. I was not engineering a dramatic moment. I was operating the way I had always operated when something needed to be addressed carefully, which was to have my documentation complete, my thinking finished, and my footing solid before I made a move I could not take back. Sandra and I were living in the same house, the way people sometimes live in the same house, when a marriage is quietly concluded, but the formal acknowledgement hasn't arrived yet. Polite, functional. The particular silence of two people who have stopped pretending the silence is something other than what it is. She was in the kitchen when I got home that Wednesday evening, making her tea at 7 o'clock the way she always did, precise and unhurried. "Harold," she glanced at me, "how was your day?" "Fine." I sat down at the kitchen table. "I want to tell you about that table. 11 years of coffee and mail and the Sunday paper, of conversations that started as conversations and ended with Sandra returning to her study and me finishing whatever I'd been trying to say to an empty chair. I sat at that table, and I watched her make her tea, and I thought about Oliver asking every night where Grandpa was. I thought about 6 weeks of that question going unanswered while I didn't know it was being asked. And then I told her Marcus had called, that Oliver had been asking about me every night, that the boy thought his grandparents had had a fight. She listened. She poured her tea. She set the mug on the counter. She looked at me with the expression of a woman who is being brought a problem that belongs to someone else's agenda. "Harold," she said, "children ask questions. He's 5 years old, Sandra. He's been asking for me every night for 6 weeks. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I understand that." Her voice was measured, even the voice she used when she was managing. "I don't know what you want me to do about it." I looked at her for a moment. "It's not a problem I need you to solve," I said. "I'm telling you something that is happening with your grandson." She looked at me. "Harold." Her tone shifted slightly, the way it shifted when she felt a conversation was becoming inefficient. "He'll adjust. Kids are resilient. It's not our problem." And there it was, the specific phrase. Not a raised voice. Not cruelty. Just that. It's not our problem. Oliver's nightly question about his grandfather. 5 years old. Every night. Not our problem. Something in me went very still. Cold and quiet and absolutely settled, the way a structure settles when the last load is placed and the math finally closes. I stood up. I rinsed my coffee cup. I set it on the drain board. Sandra was already moving toward her study with her tea. I watched her go. Then I went upstairs and called Marcus. "I'll be at Sunday dinner." I told him, "every Sunday. Tell Oliver I haven't gone anywhere." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad." "Yeah." She didn't respond the way she should have. "Did she?" "No, son." She didn't. He didn't push further. He had grown up enough to know when a man needed to close a door quietly instead of say what was in the room behind it. The following Sunday, I drove to Gahanna. Oliver met me at the door at full speed. "Grandpa." I caught him. "You came back." Right where I said I'd be, I told him. He showed me a new drawing. This bridge had 2 towers and a lighthouse on the left span, which he explained was for boats that came by at night. I told him that was the kind of thinking that solved problems nobody else had noticed yet. He said he knew. Priya had made pot roast, the good kind with the carrots that go soft. We sat at 5:30. Sandra had a work call. She'd told me that morning in the kitchen, same tone, same measured delivery. No acknowledgement of what it meant that she was skipping a Sunday dinner at her son's house the second time in 2 months, while a 5-year-old boy sat at the table with a chair empty across from him. I watched Oliver look at that chair early in the meal. He looked at it, looked at Marcus, looked at me, and then he went back to his food. He didn't ask. He had already stopped asking about the chair. That small, quiet adjustment, that 5-year-old recalibration of what to expect, was worse to watch than any argument could have been. After dinner, While Priya was in the kitchen and Oliver was being put to bed, I sat at the table with my coffee and waited for Marcus to come back. When he sat down across from me, we were quiet for a moment, the way fathers and sons can be quiet when they are in the same understanding without needing to say it. "She's not coming back to these dinners, is she?" Marcus said. It was not a question. I looked at him. "I don't believe so, no." He nodded. His jaw was tight. "I'm sorry, Dad." He looked at me. "I'm sorry for all of it." "Marcus." He waited. "What you have in that room," I said. "What Oliver has in that room with you, and Priya. The drawings on the refrigerator and the pot roast, and the way that boy runs at the door when someone he loves comes through it. That is everything. Don't let anyone make you doubt whether that is enough, because it is more than enough. It is the whole thing." His eyes were steady, but something had moved behind them. He nodded, slow. "I hear you," he said. "Good." I picked up my coffee. "Now tell me something Oliver said this week that would make me laugh." He did. And we sat there for another hour, and it was the best hour I'd had in recent memory. I moved out of the house on Minerva Lake Road on a Thursday morning in early October, loaded what mattered into the F-150 and a rented cargo van that Dennis drove over to help me with. My father's toolbox, which is old enough to have my grandfather's initials stamped into the handle panel on the left side. 3 letters, neat and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who believed in marking what was his. My engineering references, 2 shelves worth of them, the ones I still open occasionally. Oliver's drawings, which had been accumulating in a folder in my truck's cab for 4 years because they were not going into a box under any circumstances. A small frame photograph of Marcus at about Oliver's age, standing on a job site I brought him to on a Saturday morning when he was 5, wearing a hard hat that was 3 sizes too large, looking at a half-finished bridge with an expression of absolute seriousness. I had kept that photograph on my desk for 32 years. It came with me. The furniture was mostly Sandra's in origin, or jointly chosen, in a way that made no particular claim on either of us. I left it. I took the percolator because it was mine, and because I have strong opinions about how coffee should be made, and I was not going to start over at 67 with a machine I didn't trust. Dennis drove the van. I drove the truck. We loaded in the morning and drove across Columbus and unloaded in the afternoon. He didn't make it into anything. He helped me wrestle the bookcase up a narrow stairwell, and then we sat on the floor of the empty living room with sandwiches he brought in a paper bag, and we ate while the October light came through the windows at the specific angle that late afternoon has in fall, the gold, considered light that makes everything look like it is being seen for the last time. Dennis ate half his sandwich and then looked around the empty room. "Good light in here," he said. "Yeah," I said. "Good light." Sandra called while we were eating. I let it ring. She called again. I let that ring too. Dennis glanced at my phone on the floor between us, glanced at me, said nothing, and finished a sandwich. By the time he left at 4:30, she had called 14 times. I sat in the empty living room after he left, and I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, is Oliver still up?" "Yeah, hang on." The sound of small feet crossing the floor. Then Oliver's voice, slightly formal the way he got on the phone, like he was conducting a meeting. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hey, buddy. Where are you?" "I'm at my new place." He sat with that for a moment, considering. "Are you coming to Sunday dinner?" "Every Sunday," I told him. I promised. He was quiet for another moment. The particular quiet of a 5-year-old deciding whether to believe something. "Okay," he said. "Good. I have a new drawing." "I'll be there Sunday," I said. "You can show me then." "Okay," he said, and then he gave the phone back to Marcus. "You doing okay, Dad?" Marcus asked. "Getting there," I said. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you are." Sandra called 4 more times that evening, twice the following morning. Then a text. "Harold, we need to talk." Then another. Then at 11:44 that night a voicemail that I listened to once, in the dark of the bedroom in the new apartment, sitting on the edge of the bed with the city sounds coming through the window. Her voice had a quality in it I had heard only a few times in 11 years, something underneath the efficiency, something that sounded like a woman who had genuinely not anticipated the ground moving. I did not return the call. I set the phone down, and I looked at the ceiling for a while. And I thought about Oliver's bridge drawings in a folder in my truck downstairs. And I thought about the look on that boy's face at the dinner table when it stopped asking about the empty chair, that small, quiet recalibration, that 5-year-old decision to expect less. And I felt that decision I'd made at the kitchen table in September settle over me again, cold and still, and completely at peace with itself. Robert Cass and Marguerite Holloway handled what needed to be handled in the months that followed. Marguerite evaluated the assets with the same quality she apparently brought to everything, which was complete absence of wasted motion. The house on Minerva Lake Road had been mine before the marriage by 7 clear years of records. The pension and premarital investments, same. What we had built jointly in 11 years was divided equitably, which in our specific case, given what each of us had brought in and maintained separately, came out to a reasonable picture. It was not quick. Paperwork never is. But it was precise, and precise I can work with. Sandra called me 22 times in the first 2 weeks after I moved out. I know the exact number because I kept a log, out of habit, the same way I kept every other log. 22 calls. I answered on the 22nd. Not for strategy, not to make a point, just because by that day I had finished saying what I needed to say to myself, and I was ready to say what needed to be said to her. It was a short call. I told her I had seen Robert Cass. I told her she should find her own attorney. I told her I hoped she was well. She was quiet for a moment on the other end. And then she said, "Harold, I didn't think you would actually leave." "I know," I said. "That's the thing about foundations, Sandra. You don't notice them until they're gone." I said goodbye. I ended the call. I went back to my coffee. Oliver had a new drawing for me that first Sunday I came back after the move, a bridge with 4 spans, and what he explained was a rest stop on the middle pier, because drivers needed somewhere to stop and think. I told him that was a kind of innovation that changed how people move through the world. He said he knew. I put it in the folder in the cab of the F-150, next to all the others. I have been at every Sunday dinner since, every soccer game, every school event. I am not difficult to find. I am exactly where I have always said I would be, which is wherever that boy needs his grandfather to be, without condition, without we'll see, without anything that resembles a calendar conflict. A 5-year-old who used to ask every night where his grandfather had gone does not ask that question anymore, because he already knows the answer. Some structures fail slowly and without sound, and you only understand what was truly holding them up once it is gone. Some things you build carefully, over time, with the people who keep showing up, and those are the only ones worth the wait. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you on the next one.